Today we take a look at one of the most recognizable video game franchise of all time. One that started it all. One and only Call of Duty. Call of Duty owes its origin to its long-lost rival Medal of Honor, and it all started with a mutiny. The team that developed Allied Assault was not happy with the working environment at their existing company. Development cycle for the game was a nightmare. Soon after the game release, 20 or so original Allied Assault team under the leadership of Vince Zampella and Jason West decided to part ways with 2015 Inc. and thus Infinity Ward came into existence. This newly created studio had two deals in their hands, one from Electronic Arts and other from Activision. But there were apprehensions among the members that EA would end up merging them with one of its studios and identity of the team would wither away. So Infinity Ward ended up going with Activision. Activision not only offered creative independence to the team, but was also ready to fund the project for over a year. Ironically, the project was initially named Medal of Honor Killer until an official name could be found. The team worked hard to produce the new game titled Call of Duty. Critics were sure it was going to bomb. In October 2003, the game finally launched on PC.
Okay, go!
Gamers and critics went wild. The game was universally praised for its overall presentation and gameplay. Players felt as if they were inside a movie as they played through relentlessly intense combat scenes across the British, American and Russian armies. So join me as we go back in time and find out what made this game one of the best shooters of all times. Call of Duty shares similarity in themes and gameplay with Medal of Honor. However, the war is not just seen from the viewpoint of American soldiers alone, but also from the viewpoint of British and Soviet soldiers. The game further discards the lone wolf approach of Medal of Honor and instead places greater emphasis on squad-based gameplay. In each case, you play a low-level infantry soldier amid a sea of enemies. This approach of the game was something unprecedented for shooters of the time and made the game stand out from its competitors. The player is surrounded by AI-controlled allies who support the player during missions and react to situational changes during gameplay. For this, the team focused on developing their AI pathfinding component of the game, which they dubbed Conduit. COD's AI was able to provide cover, clear obstacles, flank opponents, bank grenades, and move from one cover point to another, which further added the feeling of realism to the game's environment.
Give me covering fire so I can go get him!
One of the distinguishing features of the game is how many people it can cram into the game. In lots of missions, player is surrounded by both allies and enemies, resulting in a very authentic simulation of the battle. These allies are not merely for the show, they mostly look realistic as they fight from behind cover and draw some of the enemy fire. They even sometimes charge the enemy. Occasionally, they may come in between the firing line, and intentionally shooting your allies results in game over. In COD 1, player does not have the ability to sprint. While standing, you move at a constant pace that's not too slow and not too fast, but is just right, which does not come in the way of quickly getting from point A to point B. However, when you're running from cover to cover in an area that's under fire, you will be painfully reminded of how exposed you are. The game also features a tutorial in the shape of boot camp.
I'm up here, in the observation tower. Grab one of those M1A1 carbines from the table.
Which helps familiarizing the players to weapons and game's control scheme. Each mission features a series of objectives that are marked on the compass, and player must complete all objectives to advance to the next level. Game is linear, so much so that there is zero incentive to do anything except what's being displayed as your next objective. This would be start of something that would eventually end up becoming COD's identity.
If you get hurt, grab one of those health kits and use it.
To restore health, we are dependent upon these med kits scattered throughout the battlefield or sometimes dropped by dying enemies.
Man, this is nuts! I can't believe we're doing this.
The game does not follow a set story, rather, we as players get to experience the events of war from multiple perspectives. This allowed the developers some leeway as game could be presented with different viewpoints without having to indulge in creating unnecessary backstory for the same. Whatever chunks of story that can be accessed is conveyed through the loading screens via these letters.
During that time, we may find ourselves using the Germans' own weapons against them.
In certain special missions, we get briefed by these cutscenes.
Good luck and Godspeed.
The game is split into 3 allied campaigns, American, British and Russian. Each of these parallel campaigns start around D-Day and continues through Europe until the fall of Berlin in 1945. In each campaign, you're almost always surrounded by friendly soldiers fighting alongside you, making good on the game's tagline, "No man fights alone." Since game was heavily influenced by Medal of Honor Allied Assault, comparisons are inevitable. Where Allied Assault is famous for its first mission, Call of Duty was also jam-packed with incredible set pieces, each more unforgettable than the next. British campaign opens with 2 frantic missions set at Pegasus Bridge. It's a huge outdoor area that player must defend with a variety of weapons at his disposal. The best part being, mission could be cleared in any number of ways. We can either use flak cannon to destroy incoming tanks, or use bazookas, or you can just do bare minimum and wait for the reinforcements to come. This mission made me realize the genius of the gameplay. Although the game is linear, yet there was always more than one way to approach the battlefield. This way, the game was able to induce feeling of freedom which allowed the game to actually stand apart from its rivals. Then in the opening Russian campaign mission, player does not even get to pick up a gun, and instead he's forced to act as a bait, diving from cover to cover as everything comes crashing down around you. I will sound like a broken record here. Russian missions to me are the highlight of the game. For the first time, we as players were allowed to peek into the hardships faced by the Russians during the war. These missions also highlight certain questionable means of getting things done. Deserters were shot by their own people. From a Russian's perspective, it was either death by the hands of Germans or their own comrades. Call of Duty also offers a few more densely scripted missions, such as the American level where you're riding in a car, shooting Germans out the window and hanging on for dear life, or a similar truck ride in British campaign. Then there's also a mission where we get to drive a tank. These missions may look cool, but for some reason I could never get comfortable in these, so strictly in my opinion, I prefer the game when the combat is on the ground. In order to depict the war as accurately as possible, development team extensively researched weapons, artillery and vehicles from World War II. The game features a wide arsenal of authentic American, British, Russian and German World War II weapons, including race rifles, submachine guns, sidearms and grenades. Now if you're coming from modern COD games, then there's a word of caution for you. Although the gameplay will look similar, but in reality, it's not. For example, you have rifles for long-range combat, but they lack the quickness of machine guns. While machine guns are useful in clearing out tight spaces, but these are ineffective for long ranges. Sniper rifles in the game are good, but similarly are not suitable for fast-paced combat. This made the game balanced as players were forced to use different weapons, which helped in keeping the gameplay fresh. Most of the weapons playable in the game have an authentic feel to them. As player, we can pick up any gun, ammo or weapon left by the enemy. Call of Duty succeeds with lots of AI scripting, excellent enemy placement and an effective combat model that simply does not allow you to run around unchecked in the open. Graphically, COD games were never known to break milestones. This game was developed on heavily modified Quake 3 engine and the developers managed to extract more than enough from it. The overall look of the action is excellent. Realistic weather effects, explosions and muzzle flashes help make the game's environment come alive, and the character models for friends and foes are surprisingly detailed, given how many of them can be on screen. Sound effects are the real star of this game. Each weapon has a distinct sound to it. game uses environmental sounds to increase the authenticity of the game world. In those rare instances of silence, one can still hear sounds of shooting going off in the distance. An ambient effect that reinforces the sensation that you are in the middle of a war. Call of Duty also incorporated entirely new feature, shell shock. If an explosion happened too close to the player, he momentarily experiences simulated shock, sound gets muffled with blurred vision, unable to sprint or walk properly. Some of the more action-packed single-player missions are practically deafening. Amidst all this chaos, it can be hard to hear the game's musical score. But when it does come in, it adds even more drama and cinematic flair to the proceedings.
What do you suppose the Germans have?
The game's occasional use of voice acting is good, though it's a bit of a shame that much of the Russian soldiers' voiceover and some of Germans is accented in English rather than in their respective native languages. But these are minor gripes of an old man, and I'm pretty sure this would have inflated the budget of the game unnecessarily. So this is the part where I get to highlight certain issues with the game. First of all, game is old, and as usual, for it to work properly on modern hardware, we need certain workarounds. Activision, being the greedy publishers they are, still charge a lot for a 20-year-old game. The game is way too linear with nothing else to do apart from completing objectives. Some hidden items, collectibles for reruns would have been a fun little inclusion. The shooting in the game is on the easier side, with little to no recoil for most weapons. Game is a walk in the park on easy and normal difficulties, so hard mode is recommended, which gives you decent challenge. However, on harder difficulties, I personally felt enemy AI gets transformed into James McCoy from Wanted. Further, I personally hated all those heavily scripted missions like the car and tank missions. COD's strength was its ability to provide incredible ground combat, making you feel like you were actually taking part in a real war, and these heavily scripted missions ended up disrupting that feeling.
Alright, this is the last point on our patrol.
1 year later, expansion pack for COD 1 by the name of United Offensive was released with a similar format to that of Call of Duty. We again get to play as 3 Allied soldiers caught in the great struggle against Nazi Germany. Thankfully, the gameplay returns to over-the-top form with the Soviet portion of the campaign, where you and your Soviet comrades face Hitler's last major offensive on the Eastern Front. The expansion also tries to do something new by starting you off as a gunner in a B-17 airplane that's on a bombing mission over Germany. It's a visually stunning sequence, though you do not get to do much other than shoot down waves of incoming fighter jets. As a testament to the sheer amount of chaos on the screen, United Offensive further pushes the Quake 3 engine to its limits. Graphics have now been improved quite a bit from the last game. In particularly, explosions and smoke effects are rendered beautifully now. And yes, the excellent sound effects that were present in Call of Duty also make a comeback. Further, players were given the ability to sprint, but with very limited stamina, forcing players to use it judiciously. Call of Duty was an all-round excellent game that confidently challenged head-on all the other World War II themed shooters of the time. Although now deserted by Activision on PC, the game requires some tinkering with in order to play on modern machines. With the release of Call of Duty 2 in 2005, Infinity Ward managed to successfully breach the console market, and with its immense success, ended up becoming a household name in the military shooter segment, making Activision a force to be reckoned with, and led to the creation of the world's most successful FPS franchise of all time, raking in more than $30 billion over a period of 20 years. Thanks for watching.